During the development of the Virtual Boy, another team of Nintendo engineers were apparently creating another virtual reality video game system.
And apparently it was even better than the Virtual Boy.
Let's take a look at this.
Hot take.
Jasper Hamill at metro.co.uk wrote a really interesting article interviewing one of the creators of a bunch of really cool products over at Argonaut Software.
That's right.
And these folks were very well known for having developed the Super FX chip for the Super Nintendo, and in turn helping make Star Fox a thing. So they're very well known for having done a lot of really cool things, and he was an engineer, and they were engineering a very interesting product.
Yeah, so Argonaut was responsible for a lot of 3D stuff back in the day. Maybe you remember it. You had mentioned the FX chip.
Yes.
Star Fox. They also did that game X for the Game Boy, which was really cool back in the day.
It's basically like Star Fox for Game Boy. If you've never played it, go take a look at it.
But with a wireframe sort of look to it. Yeah, so they had always been they had been working with Nintendo on and off, and it always felt like Nintendo had really sort of constrained that team in some ways.
Yeah.
And hearing this news today, it goes to further establish that, because this team had been working on supposedly a VR headset.
Supposedly.
At the same time as the Virtual Boy was being developed.
Now, what's interesting about this is typically we don't get to hear many stories behind the closed doors of Nintendo. They're a very secretive company.
Absolutely.
So this is very interesting to hear about, because around the time of the 90s, Nintendo was really trying to expand their reach of like how they develop games, and they started working more with Nintendo of America. Their Treehouse group kind of got established at that point. We started to see Rare working with Nintendo a lot more with Donkey Kong Country and stuff like that. Now, what this is basically is that at one point when they were trying to develop a virtual reality system, there was another group at Nintendo that was making this other virtual reality system through Argonaut Software.
Right.
And Nintendo had Gunpei Yokoi developing his own VR reality headset thing, which was eventually going to become the Virtual Boy.
Virtual Boy. It's really interesting, because Jeremy San, who is the engineer that was working with Argonaut at the time, he said that this Gunpei Yokoi guy basically came in, busted into whatever they were doing one day and just said, no, you're not doing this anymore. You're not making this virtual reality headset, because Nintendo's got its own thing. It's got the Virtual Boy, and well, we all kind of know what happened there.
Yeah.
It was a failure. The Virtual Boy was only on the market. It was less than a year before it was begun to be pulled.
So, the Virtual Boy is very interesting, because what happened, I believe, with Gunpei Yokoi is Gunpei is a very smart person. He passed away, unfortunately, just a few years after the Virtual Boy was released.
That's right.
But he was a very smart person, how he designed things and how he would build projects.
Right. He was responsible for, games like the first Super Mario Land, I believe he was involved with, Metroid 2. He was involved with the creation of the Game Boy proper, the classic Game Boy. And I believe after the Virtual Boy, he did some work with the Wonder Swan?
Yes, he was one of the creators of the Wonder Swan. What's interesting about what he basically does is that when he would design a product, he would find a way to make the most simple hardware work efficiently. So, for instance, if you've never used the Wonder Swan will last for 20 or 40 hours. It's really ridiculous on a single AA battery. It's an insane idea, but the system works. I've used it several times, and we did a video on it a long time ago. Gunpei Yokoi also found simplified ways to make the Game Boy efficient and to do stuff like that. He's always worked that hard to make those things happen. So when the Virtual Boy was coming out, they basically wanted to make something that had more simplified ideas and was easier to produce rather than something that was too complex and too expensive.
Because at the time, they had the technology to do much more with the Virtual Boy than they actually did. The Virtual Boy was a monochromatic screen. It was just red and black, shades of red and black. Whereas they did have the technology to integrate more color into the Virtual Boy, but it would have been more expensive.
Yes.
And Gunpei Yokoi was known for making sure that things were reasonably priced for the market. Right.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why the Game Boy had again the monochromatic look back in the day.
And a lot of people have stated this in the past, from a whole bunch of different sources, that Nintendo felt that black and red look was kind of futuristic.
Yeah.
But as hindsight's 2020, we've now looked back, we've seen the problems, and there's a lot of interesting things about the Virtual Boy.
Yeah.
But clearly, it's a system that just didn't have a chance to survive. Its harsh look doesn't really work well on your eyes after a while, and just playing the system's a little bit of a problem because you have to basically sit really close to a table. It doesn't strap to your face or anything like that.
I think the history of the system just tells you everything you need to know. It was not on the market for very long. But the Virtual Boy out of the way, suddenly, just today, we hear this news about Jeremy San, this person who was working with Argonaut developing this VR headset. It was supposedly called the Supervisor.
Yes, so that's super one word and visor is the second one.
That's not a joke.
No.
It was called the Supervisor.
Which makes a lot of sense when you think about things like the Super Nintendo, the Super Scope, right? That's the idea.
It does
there.
link in with Nintendo's sort of naming scheme from back then. So I have some of what Jeremy said was supposedly integrated into this unit was very, very surprising for this time. So this is around 1995-ish, supposedly, 94, 95. He said that this was more powerful than the Virtual Boy. He said that it offered full-color graphics, head tracking, and would let you interact with simulated environments. Supposedly, this headset was not... It could have been made and would not have been crazy expensive. So this sounds like it was making the best of almost every aspect of what VR could have been, where the Virtual Boy kind of failed.
Yes. Now, there are a lot of VR type devices in the mid-90s that people don't really remember anymore. But we actually got to play these things when we were kids. I was in San Francisco when I was a kid at a mall, and they had virtuality.
Virtuality.
Yeah, so virtuality was basically an arcade system that you would sit in or you'd stand in. I played the standing model.
Okay, the standing was like a pod.
Yeah, it was like
almost.
A pod. You'd stand in it. There'd be like a little guide thing. They handed me a VR gun, and then I put on a headset, and I was in this like basically it was just a walking thing. So you could choose to move forward or just stop, and you would keep moving in one direction, and you'd shoot at things. And I was blown away as a kid. Like this was unlike anything I'd ever seen before.
Right.
Johnny Mnemonic had just come out, and I was like, this is it. I need to be plugged in. Like it was this really cool thing.
There was that time where like Lawnmower Man came out. I think Lawnmower Man was first, and then there's Johnny Mnemonic, Virtuosity. Do you remember Virtuosity with Russell Crowe?
There's a lot of VR stuff back at this point.
Right. Everyone thought it was the next step in gaming, and that it was coming like the next year. It was always the next year.
Yeah.
You would constantly be looking through Game Pros or your whatever Game Fan magazines, and you would see these sort of like prototype helmets that were supposedly around the corner from the big names.
Now, what's interesting is that many of the people that would actually be working on these devices were actually from the UK. It's a great portion of them. Amiga was a very big system in the UK, and those virtuality machines, I believe, and I may be wrong, ran off Amiga systems. Like modified ones, obviously, but they were very powerful systems. So
these were systems that were playing things like what you had mentioned, as well as one that game that's much more famous, Dactyl Nightmare. I think people remember that quite a bit as well. So it was a pretty simplified experience, but I believe there was some head tracking there, right?
Sure.
Not necessarily positional tracking, but head tracking. And supposedly the headset that was being worked on for Nintendo by the Argonaut team did have head tracking.
Yes. So it's not really crazy for me to think that there was a team in the UK that had already established great use of hardware with Super FX chip and the ability to make 3D graphics on systems that simply were not capable of doing it. Well, they were, but nobody knew it at the time. This company was very well regarded.
They were established for making magic happen.
Yes.
Things that we didn't think were possible with like a Super Nintendo. So I don't think it's crazy to assume that maybe they did have a virtual reality helmet that was very capable.
Now, what's interesting to me. So if it was more powerful, that's a big deal. So I have to assume that at the time that this was being developed, they had already done the Super FX chip. Super FX chip 2 was being created.
I think it was a little later, but
yeah. So there's probably this idea here that they were actually going to be making a system that was essentially just a Super Nintendo that was a little bit more powerful that utilized that kind of hardware. Because when they say more powerful, realistically, having VR digital graphics that are 3D. The Super Nintendo was capable of that, right? There is that capability
with the help of the chipset.
Yeah, and this company had done that. So when they say more powerful, definitely I can envision that being far more powerful than anything you would have seen on the Virtual Boy.
Yeah.
Because the Virtual Boy was a far cheaper device.
Right. One where I have difficulty kind of believing everything in this story, like taking things with a bit of a grain of salt, is like it may have been more powerful, but was the price point really all that low? And was I believe in the article they say like Jeremy San had basically said, look, this was the Oculus Rift experience 20 years prior. Now I know he doesn't mean like the graphics were the same, but he was saying it was quite comparable to what you would feel, that the sort of presence that you would feel in virtual reality today back then. How is the frame rate?
See, that's
right. That's a huge part of VR as we know it today. So
when you think of full color graphics at the time period, full color graphics would have been a little bit more difficult to do. And now I've actually used VR headsets at the time, I said, and I've used other VR headsets as well. And one of the things they typically would do is they would put some kind of tiny screen in front of your eyes. And the resolutions back then, that would have been an issue. Now, believe it or not, you may not be aware of this, but Sega had also tried to introduce their own VR headset, and they actually showed off a real working demo at E3 one year, and I have been trying to find someone that has some footage of that, or like some kind of demo.
Or even just hear about their experiences.
Oh, yeah. If somebody at Sega is watching, and you know where we can find that, and we'd love to make a video on that, but that technology was there, and it was active, and people were working in that field. So to know that there was something like that there, I could easily see something that was at least 2 standard definition images in front of your eyes that were being just played in some kind of stereoscopic way so that you had that image of depth. With Nintendo's prevalence at the time, and with Argonaut Software designing 3D graphics, no doubt in my mind were you getting 3D polygons with a full color screen at standard definition. That would have been impressive for its time.
Yeah, I'm assuming it looked very much like the Star Fox games, and that you're not necessarily seeing a bunch of textures and things, but it does feel like a 3D world that you're in, like Dactyl Nightmare, per se. So basically what happened with this VR headset was, like I said, Gunpei Yokoi basically wound up scrapping what the Argonaut team had done, but the Argonaut team moved forward with the product, and they tried to sell the idea to Hasbro. Supposedly, Hasbro was going to be working on some sort of a video game console system that they wound up getting rid of as well. So, like, yeah, the tech was almost a thing, not once but twice.
See, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about the stuff that they offer too, like when they're talking about head tracking and things like that, the head tracking that we consider nowadays isn't the same kind of head tracking they would have had back then.
Right.
Traditionally, the head tracking at that point in time was kind of like a series of magnets type of thing. It's a little bit more complex than that, but it uses polarity and stuff to basically assign where you are.
Yeah, the accelerometer technology was not nearly anywhere where it is today.
And it would have been expensive too. Right. And just to know that this is like the ideas that they had there, and they were taking it to Hasbro, they must have had something that was pretty impressive, because Hasbro doesn't just say, oh yeah, we'll have a meeting with you. There had to be something there that was tangible.
Yeah.
And I mean, this company knew what they were doing. Now, here's the question, the one for $1 million.
There's so many questions. There's only one?
If we were to assume that not only was the system powerful enough, not only was the system producing 3D graphics that were comparable to, let's just say, Star Fox. Not Star Fox 2, just Star Fox. Let's say that it was capable of tracking your head movements, and the price came in at around maybe $50 or $100 more than the Virtual Boy. Would it have been a success?
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's kind of what the article has posed as well, is could this have changed the VR landscape as we know it today? That all depends on the software, I believe. I even think that if the Virtual Boy did have some sort of a killer app, Wario Land was really good.
Yeah.
But if it had something that really stood out and grabbed people's attentions, like with the same way that like a Pokemon game did for the Game Boy. The Game Boy was very successful already, but I just mean like some sort of title that really got people. Maybe the Virtual Boy would have seen a couple years instead of like a half year.
Sure.
So no matter how great this VR headset is, if it came out with software that was just like, hey, it's Tetris in VR, very simplified, or just, let's say, games that look like Star Fox, but the frame rate was like 5 frames per second or something.
And that's exactly where my head goes. I don't believe, even if this had come out, I don't believe it would have been a success. The reason being is that at the time period, the way people were playing games, even if Nintendo were to have done their best, and on the Virtual Boy, there are some pretty good games, believe it or not. There is this idea there that people would have had these experiences, bringing them home, playing them, but we had VR. in the 90s. People were very impressed with it at the time. Virtuality was a big deal for a lot of folks. A lot of people went to the arcades to play it.
Yep.
It's just, it didn't continue. Virtuality was probably the biggest success they had at the time. But to know if you could take this and bring it home, I do believe that the price would have been a little bit... I mean, Virtual Boy was there. You know, I think that the price for a system like this that you couldn't share with others, that's a huge problem. When you bring the Virtual Boy home, it's just you looking into a headset. Right. And to this day, we still have that problem with virtuality where people are just like, okay, virtual reality video game number 7 for Oculus, whatever. And then it's bugging people because they can't share that experience with others.
Yeah, we do have the option to put things on monitors and stuff now, but even then, it's still not working exactly as we would love it to. The interactivity isn't quite there.
A great example of this too, actually. Just today, they announced a brand new headset from Oculus. So it's called the Oculus Quest.
Yeah.
Oculus Quest has a whole bunch of videos, and one of the videos shows somebody wearing the headset and playing a game, and then you see somebody on a couch just staring at them, and it's like, yeah, but see, that's the problem. This experience is very insular. So it's something that one person experiences, and you can't share that with others. If I were to sit down, you know how I first played Earthbound?
How was that?
My friend rented it from the store, went to Blockbuster, rented the cartridge, came back home, and a group of us sat there and we just played it together as one group. It was this different way to experience that. And Super Mario 64, I experienced the first time with a group of friends. Those games have this experience where I'm sharing it with people, and YouTube has been great with that.
We have a social platform that was developed specifically so that you could watch people play video games. Twitch is enormous.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's because you can watch your favorite streamers doing things. If you have some sort of a technology, a video game tech, you have to be able to share that.
And I think one of the big problems is, too, if somebody didn't go to a store to test one of these things out, they likely would have just been like, whatever, I'm looking at this and it looks just like any normal video game. Even if they had amazing graphics that were comparable to the Super Nintendo, it still probably wouldn't have taken off because it just didn't sell the idea. Being able to tell people why virtual reality is so interesting is so hard when it's just something that has a level to it that is just hard to break through.
Even the 3DS had difficulties like that in the very beginning, where Nintendo was just saying, hey, the 3D's here. Well, I mean, we can't show it to you.
Yes.
Not in this commercial. We can have Bowser come out of this 3DS and show you what 3D could be like. But yeah, until people got those in their hands, everyone had the right to be skeptical.
It's hard, right? Yeah. This is a very big deal. That we've had so many different ideas of virtuality, 3D gameplay, holographic gameplay, and all this other stuff from the arcades and from home video game systems, and it's just something that people tend to think it's an interesting thing, but it doesn't hold them forever. Now, the games are a big deal, having those titles, which I think Nintendo could have probably achieved something there, but I firmly believe that even if this had come out, there were so many hurdles they would have had to get across that it simply couldn't have worked.
Yeah, I almost feel like the article poses that Gunpei Yokoi came in and just scrapped things as if on a whim. But I feel like there were probably some maybe price point difficulties, frame rate difficulties, many different things that had them say, no, we're going to dial things back and try the Virtual Boy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, two big problems, right? Here's ones that I think if you just think of the next step, let's just say this thing was successful and they took Nintendo 64 hardware and they put it in this headset, let's say like a sequel version of it. Well, then all those great games you would have been playing on the N64 would not have been popular. Think about this. GoldenEye is now a single player experience, and you don't play with your friends because you don't have multiplayer unless they also happen to have one of those systems. That's not smart because at the time, the idea of having 4 controller ports on the bottom of the Nintendo 64 that you could play 4 players with people in one TV. That's the thing that you wouldn't have got with a VR headset. Then you have to consider if this thing was portable, which I don't know if it would have been, but let's just assume it was. Kids would have been taking this to school. They might have been breaking it. It would have been a very expensive proposition on that front.
Also, this was at the height where video games had a bit of a stigma to them. There were several years there where video games were seen as like the devil in a sense.
Yeah.
And then making a video game system where no one else can see what you're doing and the person who's using it is basically blind to the real world. Nintendo saw that and I'm sure they looked at what they had done with the Virtual Boy and said, okay, you can take your head out of it at any time.
Yep.
You're not just walking around a room or like blindly standing up and swerving around.
Here's something. I've used VR in plenty of public situations. At the time, did you ever use virtual reality or Virtual Boy in like a demo kiosk at a store?
Yeah, at Walmart I did.
When you did that, did the person looking over the kiosk wipe the lens clean? No, they didn't. Yeah, think about that. Think about all those kids with pink eye, bringing that to school and then sharing pink eye with everyone else. Yeah. It would have been a monumental disaster. I know pink eye is like not the biggest deal in the world, but there are actual problems with this system that literally would not have been thought of at the time that would have caused problems. We look at these things now back and you think about all the problems that they would have had to deal with modern VR that they're dealing with now. I don't think there was any solution for them at the time because it was just an insurmountable problem. Mm-hmm. But it still would have been cool hardware, and that's why I'm still excited to actually see anything that might come out.
Yeah, I would love to have seen a prototype unit or whatever, but it is exciting to talk about, to dream about what could have been, because Argonaut was absolutely fantastic. What do you guys think about this? Do you think that this would have been some sort of a VR boom? It would have made VR maybe come into its own earlier? Maybe we'd have a different VR space today. What games do you think would have been released for this thing? Let us know in the comments below.
Do you think maybe it would have been a success? Right? Let us know what you think.